Okay. Well, this is day one of our sessions for the AIC oral history file. Excuse me. And first, I think obvious thing to start with is where and when you were born.
On a farm in northern Jutland, in Denmark. Do you want my birthday too?
Well, it would be helpful if
on the 8th of May in 1921. And I'm the eldest daughter of a family of 4 boys and 4 girls.
So in your early experiences in school, when did you start? Was that at 4 or?
No, in Denmark you start school at 7.
At 7?
Yeah.
So before that time, what did you do at home? Did you work with the farm or?
Yes, and I suppose that we were very, very lucky. One of our maids, when I was little, was a good needlewoman, and she taught me to embroider before I could read. Of course, I suppose it must have been 3 or 4. And she had a lot of patience, and that was very nice. Then I made a loom in a cigar box. My father smoked a lot of cigars, and we always had lots of cigar boxes. Made little mats for my doll's house that I also was very fond of. Made all the furniture for it.
So was it, did you have a continuous warp, or was it sort of the things that one can take a string and tie it at 2 ends, and make the warp in separate elements?
I don't know, really. Perhaps.
Do you have any of them left?
Oh no.
No.
When I finish something, I'm finished. I also used to enjoy making dolls' clothes in national costumes from postcards that got sent to us from different people. I think that was quite fun. Then the farm is in the north of Jutland. It's very high up, and I suppose the fields must have one time been covered with Bronze Age barrows. There are only a few left now.
The mounds or
the mounds, yeah. So the ploughman would always be ploughing up things, and I was quite fascinated by all those different things that came in. An urn once, a whole urn, and of course masses and masses of flint axes. But of course, as a child, I thought that was that they were specially made for keeping down the farm papers. It was later that I discovered that they had another purpose. Then the farm had been in the family for some time. So my aunts and uncles were frequent visitors, and of course my cousins too. We would sometimes be 22 children together, you know. Wow. My brothers and sisters and cousins and friends' children and friends, generally speaking. So there was always a lot of interest in everything that we did, and that of course included the things that were found in the fields, and, you know.
So were you ever at uncovering of one of the mound people, or did you go to the museum, National Museum, to see them, or?
No, I suppose that there were museums in. No, it was generally speaking what we found and what other people had, and they came to show us, and visitors were interested, and we collected stuff. There's before the farmhouse. My grandfather built the farmhouse, and while it was being built, the family lived in a small house that he had built before in the garden. And we used that for playing in, so we collected lots of things, from old furniture to anything we found in the fields. And so that I suppose we didn't really think about classifying them. Perhaps we should. And then there was the church, because in those days you went to church every Sunday, at least we did. And I wasn't all that keen on the sermons, I suppose. So I would be looking at things in the church, which had been given by the manor house, from the people in the manor house nearby. Embroideries, two pieces that I think must have come, that I now know must have come from a bed, a four-poster bed.
How wonderful.
Another piece.
Did they just hang along the walls, or were they?
No, that was on the altar. That was on the altar. Yeah. And another piece, about 16th century, I think. I mean, that's now that I know that. Showing the saints in roundels. And what else? There was a painting of one of the former owners of Sudal. Big, fat man, and his wife, who was a tiny, delicate little person. And I kept wondering why she'd married him. That was something else. But their clothes were quite fascinating. She wore a fontange and very nice grey silk dress. And the altar was fun. It had angels flying all over it. Now I know that it was probably carved in perhaps by someone traveling from places like southern Germany or even Hungary. And in those days I was quite convinced that those little angels were beautiful pink babies, as I said before, just like my brothers and sisters and cousins. And then I was asked to give a talk about how I came to do conservation at all. And I thought that I would begin with the little angels, you see. And I asked my sister to go and photograph them. And she did. And she sent these slides of horrible wooden objects with grey paint.
Oh. Had they just...
No.
It was just the child's image? Or?
Yes, that's the thing, you see. That's what I saw, because that's what I wanted to see, I suppose.
Oh, wonderful.
It was quite interesting, though, growing up and eventually visiting places like Czechoslovakia and Hungary and southern Germany, and seeing where the ideas had come from. They were a bit different, but very interesting.
But I know there's a story that you tell about, I guess you were quite a bit older, but about some pieces that were repaired
in the church.
In the church.
Yeah, they were those pieces, and they came back when I was 13. No. Well, I saw them when I was 13, after they had been repaired.
So these are things that you'd seen all the years, so you knew them very well.
Well, I didn't know them well. I knew they were there.
Yeah,
I knew they were there, but I didn't know them well. I didn't get to know them well until they came back from being repaired at the National Museum in Copenhagen. And they've been repaired again now at the National Museum.
Have you seen them?
Yes. Yeah. Well, I should know one of them only, one of the pieces only, and I had a picture, photograph of them.
And the story is that you were struck by the pieces, isn't that, as they came back?
Yeah, more because of looking at the repair, see. Because it hadn't occurred to me that one did anything like this, in order to keep things. And then I saw them come back, and they were so very, very nice looking and colourful and interesting, and I could pick out the work that had been done to them. And so that started me off looking for repairs in other things when I visited great houses or museums.
Is that when you were in your teens then?
Yes, I suppose it must have been, because then I went away to school and saw different things and began to really become aware of this. But the interest in conservation as such was furthered when I went to art school in Copenhagen, and I was lucky enough to be invited to live with the librarian of the Museum of Decorative Arts, her daughter. And the school was housed in the same building. And I got to know the people who worked there, and I got to know the ethics of conservation that they worked to.
So then these were the actual conservators that you met?
There weren't really any conservators. They were curatorial staff. Yeah, but they were looking after the objects, and they worked from the point of view of looking after them. And one was Wilmer Karup.
How do you spell that?
IDMORKARUP.
Okay. Just to get back a little bit, just for basic knowledge, was there someone in your family who was an artist, or was this someone who was a weaver, or anything that had something to do with textiles or art in general?
Well, my mother was a gardener before she was married, and she was very, very good at flower arrangements and things like that. And she, generally speaking, made everything really beautiful around her. And she was always called in by the neighbors for special occasions to suggest how things could be made to look pretty.
Sort of interior
and for special occasions like weddings and christenings and funerals, because in those days people were receiving visits to say goodbye when they were dead, and in their own homes. And our farmhouse was built in the traditional way, with a large room that was, generally speaking, only used for storing things in between the parties and the christenings and the laying outs and the weddings. And in fact, the front door was built so that the coffins could be carried straight through from the room to that. Yeah. And this. The part of Denmark where I come from is quite old-fashioned in many ways, and it was still the tradition then that all members of a household would eat together, and that when there were parties, the daughters from the farms would help with, the daughters of friends of the family would help with serving and meeting guests and everything like that. And so it was, a question really of living within traditions all the time that were very strong and still alive. And
did that also include weaving traditions and?
No, that had gone a long time before that. Yes, embroidery.
That was still.
Yes. Yeah.
Traditional or?
Not traditional, no.
So
my mother was very fine embroideress. Before she was married, I don't think she did much after.
So did you mentioned that there was a maid? Did she help with the children or the house or?
Well, with everything. When we were quite small, there was a nursemaid, but then after that 2 maids, and they would they would work in the house, and they would also in summertime help outside, and everybody did the milking things until we got the milking machine. And they were mostly quite good at embroidery. In the winter, we would clothes would be made and repaired, and embroidery would be done. That was when I was very little.
So then your father worked in the farm, and there were obviously cows for dairy cows. Did he grow crops also?
Yes, it was a mixed farm. It is a mixed farm, yeah.
And it's still in the family?
Oh, yes.
Oh, nice.
Yes. My brother has added an awful lot to the buildings, and of course it's quite mechanized now. So he's managing to run it with just two helpers.
Great. So then you started school when you were 7.
Yeah.
And did they include things like, Scandinavia is known for its teaching of embroidery and that sort of thing in school. And
yes.
did yours also?
Yes, yes.
And so you had an advanced
Yes, you could
training.
say that. Yes. Yeah.
And then what was school experience like? Which schools did you go to? And
Well, first of all, the village school, and later I was sent away to high school, and there we did embroidery too, an awful lot more embroidery. And then I began to think about what to do, and I thought that weaving would be nice. So as luck would have it, I was accepted at the art school in Copenhagen and went there. That was a 3-year course, and then weaving and design. And I was very pleased that I had a good background in embroidery before I came there, because it did help quite a lot with seeing and understanding everything.
So then the village school, was that just, I'm sorry, I'm going back again, but the village school, was that in the neighborhood and
Yes,
very
yes,
close by?
yeah. Well, fairly.
And it was at one one-room schoolhouse? Or
No,
was it? No,
bigger than
it was
that.
big.
Yes,
So it was
bigger
a
than that, yeah.
large, populated area then.
Well, it was quite. Yes. Now it has been moved out to the village, and it's very big place now. Yeah.
So then you stayed there for how many years about? Do you remember?
No, there were so many different things I did. I suppose there must have been 14 or 15, something like that. And but I continued to have lessons in English and German. And
throughout high school, or
no, before that, after I left school until high school.
So then, I'm sorry, I'm a little confused.
Yeah.
If you went to the village school and left at about 14 or so, 15, and then continued with English and German at home?
Yes, and the teacher's wife was teaching me.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why was there a delay between? Was it a long distance or a lot of
long
money
distance.
and
Long distance.
long distance?
Yeah.
So.
And it wasn't the custom then.
So then high school started when you were what age?
17. I was there in between. I've forgotten about that.
So that was why you didn't go, or?
Yes, I didn't go as soon as I should have, because it was a problem with infection of the marrow of the bones.
Sounds serious.
It was a bit.
Ooh.
But I'm all right.
I can see.
Yes.
So then.
And then I went to the art school. Okay.
And at high school, then you had to. It was like a boarding school.
Yes. Yeah.
And did they have dormitories, and
Yes.
was it boys and girls at the school?
Not in the summer. In the winter it would have been, but I went in the summer. Yeah.
And the subjects that you took, were they?
History and embroidery and nutrition and how to run a farmhouse. with 2 maids and a nanny, and how to cut up a calf and a pig.
So it was very practical.
Part of it was, yeah. Part of
And
it.
did they introduce some basic science or
Yes,
so chemistry or
yes. You know household food for
household?
yeah, yeah.
So then you went to the art school,
Yeah.
and that was, you were how old then when you?
Gosh, you know the thing.
It's hard to place.
Yeah, I
them.
can't remember really. See, I think I must have been 21.
21. Okay.
Yeah.
And at the art school, then that was when you were living.
At the Museum of Decorative Art, yeah.
And so she lived in the museum.
The museum had been built as a hospital in the 18th century. It is a hospital that Hans Christian Andersen wrote his story about the galoshes of luck.
Oh, I didn't know it. That's terrible.
And it was made into a museum, and it was designed by Professor Cora Clint, who was the husband of Mrs. Clint. And there were 4 flats, I think, and she had one of them, one in each corner of the building.
That must have been spectacular.
It was big. It was very nice.
And in the art school itself, what was the schedule like? What kind of classes, or was it free, or was it very structured, or?
We had theory in the mornings, and most mornings, and practical work in the afternoon.
And that was the theory involved what sort of?
Analysis of weaves and dyeing, color theories of different kind, and drawing, and all the things one does. Design.
Is it was it part of the sort of revival arts and crafts sort of, because the handwork organizations?
No, it is no. The art school may have been that originally, but by the time that I got there, it was very much established as just an art school.
So then it was.
Teaching modern design, and not much looking back. And in fact, we were heavily discouraged, I think, from visiting museums.
Really?
Yeah. By this time, this seemed to be the fashion. But I was very lucky because of my relationship with the people working in the museum. And also, they introduced us to the National Museum, which was closed. Remember, this was during the war. So many museums were closed, and certainly the National Museum Study collection was, because it was high up in the building. And but a colleague of mine who later started the textile. I don't know if you call it department, textile section of the archaeological research center at Leia.
I'm not familiar with that.
There's the, perhaps I should have told you about this at some point. There's a young man called Hans Ole Hansen, and his father was a writer who died quite early. Hans Ole and his sister, but especially Hans Ole, was allowed to build Stone Age houses in their gardens and invite friends for weekends and sleep in them and everything. And then accidentally they burned one, and they discovered all sorts of interesting things about where the stones fell and things. And that led to the Historical Archaeological Research Center at Leia near Roskilde. And where research was done over a wide field of archaeology to find out what happened to houses and things. And my friend Nina, that's her name, she started the research on ancient textile techniques there. which included things like reconstruction of round weave looms, round weave looms, and generally speaking, research into ancient techniques, which still going on. But she moved from there because she also has great interest in animals and breeding sheep back to what they were and things. Yeah.
So then Nina, was it?
Yeah, Nina Ratje. Ninarratje.
Okay. Then was she also a fellow arts school?
Yes, yes. And
so she was in the same weaving course. Were there others that joined this research center from the art school, or what were their backgrounds?
Mostly they were, it's now organized from the National Museum Copenhagen, so they would all be museum people. But for a long time, the place was open to international scholars that came from all over the world and worked beyond the summer on this map, and making ceramics as they did 3,000 years ago, things. And as I said, all the animals.
So did you participate in this at all, or was
No,
it
it was after I'd left from there. Yeah. But I've been there. I mean, I visited every time I was home.
So then, during the 3 years, then I take it you had, in the practical side, created quite a number of weavings.
Yes.
What were they like? What were you interested in?
I think I'm mainly interested in fabrics for household use, if you like.
So it's functional.
Yeah. Yes. Well, it was including tapestry, but not dress so much. Not dress fabric so much, but generally speaking, for household use.
And the designs then, were they created through the actual manipulation of the weaving loom, or was it actually more tapestry finger manipulation of?
Well, we began with the drawing designs and working.
So it was a mathematical approach as well as...
I think with weaving you can't do anything unless you have a mathematical approach.
Great.
Yes.
And from there then, did you have a show at the end of the school, or how did... And do you have any of those pieces still?
They're dispersed all around in the reference collection. So I mean, what's left?
In this room.
Yeah, what's left of? I mean, mostly I gave them away. I'm not very good at keeping anything. That's, I suppose, why all the stuff is here, not at home.
Okay. Well, after then leaving the art school, was it a diploma then in art?
Yeah. I've forgotten what it was called, but it was diploma certificate. I got that somewhere too.
And then, what did you do from there?
Well, then I met Norman. And
in Denmark, or
in Denmark, yes. And after the art school, I worked for a while in a place where we were weaving tapestries and carpets. And
was it sort of a formal atelier, or was it a manufacturing, more industrial?
No, it wasn't industrial. No. It all hand.
And that was in Copenhagen? And how long were you there?
I think it was only a few months. And then I got married and came to England in 1946.
What was Norman doing in
Well, he
Denmark?
came to liberate Denmark, a year before. Yeah.
And you met him in Copenhagen?
There were masses of parties for all our liberators, of course.
I see. And how did you feel about coming to England?
I don't think I thought a lot about it until I got here.
And how old were you?
25.
Uh-huh. Did you have a traditional Danish wedding, or?
Yeah.
And
not a white wedding, but otherwise quite traditional. It was in Copenhagen because we made up our minds quite late. I think that we only decided to get married about a week before.
No.
So we were married in the Royal Naval Church in Copenhagen, Holmenskirke. And by one of the people who influenced me most, Pastor Sharon Nielsen, he came to our village when I was 7, stayed till I was 14. And I suppose it could well be that it is really because of his interest in everything that I did that I came into conservation.
How so?
Well, he was the one who made us all, but perhaps me more than anybody, aware of the treasures in the church and what they meant and how important our history was.
So did he in the end marry you?
Yeah.
I see. And he had moved to Copenhagen?
Yes, yeah. Okay. And now, when he showed me all these things and I began to look for repairs, it was really from the point of view, I suppose, that I could do that just as well as anybody, perhaps better. And in Copenhagen, he knew me very, very well. And I used to spend a lot of time with his wife and family while I was at art school. And one of the things about the wedding was that he used the English marriage ceremony, but he cut out the bit about the bay because he said that he couldn't have Karen breaking her marriage vows on the first day.
That's wonderful. Oh, that's great.
I'm not sure it is. I'm not sure it is very good, really. And then he also managed to provide me with 3 marriage certificates, just in case I didn't take marriage seriously enough. And he also suggested that we should spend some of the money we got as wedding present on a ring for me, because he said English landladies are not going to like brides without rings. And I wouldn't wear this outmoded symbol of, women's dependency on man.
So you were a feminist then?
Oh, I was then, but when people started becoming feminists, I left all that because I believe in freedom for everybody, not just women.
So what about Norman then? How? What was he doing at this point? He was in the military?
He was demobbed by this time.
He was, excuse me?
Demobbed. That meant left the army. Demobilized. Demobilized. Yes. Okay. And he started training for something to do with furniture. But eventually he went in for bookkeeping and accountancy. So
he was working, let's say, in furniture making.
Yeah.
So it was joinery and that sort of.
Yes.
And that lasted.
I can't quite remember, but at any rate, he then began in the bookkeeping. Of course, and then he worked in personnel at a firm called Walls, and then afterwards he was with the furniture and timber training.
Furniture and timber
training board.
Training board.
Yeah.
And so where did you came to England? What part of England did you come to?
To London.
To London.
Yeah.
And that was right after marriage.
Yes.
And
then I got a job at the Royal School in Needlework.
And that was right away.
Yes. More or less. After months. So.
How about your English?
Well, it wasn't too bad, I suppose, because remember I told you that I was taught English as a child in Copenhagen. One of the ways that we demonstrated during the war was by attending English classes. And we would stand there after the evening classes at night on the doorstep listening to where they were shooting tonight, so we would go another way home. And
well, then at the Royal School of Needlework, what was the job?
well, do you want to know how I got there?
Yes, I'd love to.
I hope that you're not going to ever publish any of this. You promised to let me know beforehand.
That's right.
Yeah, so I can cut out anything.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, I was of course fascinated by being in London, wanted to see everything. And one day I was going to the Victoria and Albert Museum to do some drawing or something like that. I walked down another way from Exhibition Road and saw Royal School of Needlework and exhibition showrooms on the wall of one of the buildings. So I went in to have a look, and there was this amazing place with all those terribly, terribly old-fashioned designs and cases full of stuff given by Queen Mary. And I was in an absolute trance looking at all this awful stuff. And then a lady came up to speak to me. I didn't know her name then, but later I learned that it was Miss Heath. And she wanted to know what I was doing in London. She was very, very nice, wanted to know everything about it. She asked where did I come from. I said Denmark. I was wearing my little red pixie cap and Marlene, the raincoat.
No? It's a traditional Danish, or is it?
No, it was just fashion at the end. So, see.
I see.
But obviously I didn't look English, so and then she said, when are you going home? And I said, I'm not, I live here, I'm married to an Englishman. So she said, oh dear, would you like a job? So I said, what should I be doing? And she said, restore tapestries. And I said, yes, well, I know how to make them, so I suppose I can. All right. And then she called the head of the workroom, Tracy, who came. And she asked me a few questions too, and said, would you like to begin on Monday? And I said, supposing that I can't do it. And she said, would you like to try it for a week? And she said yes. And I said yes. And then at the end of the week, I was sitting there waiting all day long for whether they would. Because by this time I'd made friends with everybody. Met my oldest friend in England, who's now in charge of the workroom, Margaret Bartlett. And my first real friend. And Miss Racy had forgotten to say that she was really very pleased with my work.
Anyway, at the end of the week?
Yes. Anyway, she did tell me before the day was up, perhaps because I asked her. And
So they said yes, they want you to come back on Monday.
Yes.
So that was when, well, how many people were in the workshop for one thing? Were there?
I don't quite know. I think it must have been about a dozen, something like that.
And then you were all working on the same tapestry, or no?
Oh yeah, there were, yes. There was a tapestry in the corner.
So they were also doing other things besides tapestries.
Well. And I did a lot of embroidery because, of course, that's my thing. Yeah. I knew about embroidery. And I learned to do gold work, just a little.
Gold work meaning?
Stitch.
Laden couch gold.
Yeah.
And what were the treatments like? Or where did these pieces come from, for one thing?
Oh, private places.
And
at least I think so. I never heard anything else. But people didn't really talk about where they came from. It wasn't done. It wasn't a thing you did. And
Was it? Why was that? Was it
because people could be very upset if they knew that the things they owned were being talked about.
because they would be devalued, or because they just didn't want them known that they had to be repaired, or why is that?
No, I think just because they owned them, they didn't want their possessions to be talked about.
Oh.
It is why we, when something is privately owned, we don't say what it belongs to.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then you would work on the pieces in a modern sense of conservation, or was it more restoration, or what was the work like? And also, I'm sorry, what year was this?
47.
1947.
46, 47. Yeah. 48.
Okay.
It was repair, I think, could only call it. And that of course meant that I looked at all these awful things, you know. I couldn't tell the design because they'd been repaired 20 times. And I would suggest things like, why don't you commission a nice modern design? And I would be pleased to read this for you.
So they did you?
Yeah. No. I think the people were quite horrified seeing your modern Danish design on 18th century French chair.
Oh, that would be pretty bad.
And it was absolutely amazing. But I learned a tremendous lot, including about tapestries. If you care to, you could read. Because last year before, when I was asked to talk about how I devised the method that we're using here in tapestry weaving at the Gobelins, I put it together, and I think it is. It was really as a result of the Royal School of Needlework, and also of a visit to Rosenborg when I was still at the art school in Copenhagen to see what they were doing to tapestries there.
This is
Rosenborg Castle. Okay. Yeah.
And what were they doing?
Well, the tapestries that had been woven to the design of Hans Knieper, Hansknieper, were found in Rosenborg. And they had been left in the cellars, and they'd been eaten by rats and mice and moths, and they were in a very, very bad condition. A group of ladies got together to restore them, and they were given space in Rosenborg Castle to do it. And they were, unfortunately, all of them embroiderers, and they didn't really know anything about weaving. They restored the design very well, and they look at a distance. They look very, very good. But of course, it is embroidery now.
What? When you mean that it was embroidered, did they use satin stitches and French knots and that sort of thing?
No. It's just the same kind of thing as really has been, except better in design. That was done to the tapestries from Lime Park, the mortlegs from Lime Park.
So it's more of a very neat darning, or
no? They unfortunately treated each warp thread as something on its own. So, which means that it's very, very hard work to undo anything like that.
Oh, I see. So you would actually stitch, sort of like what we do, except not going in a weft direction, but you would go in a warp direction.
Yes. But as I said, they did the designs very well. It was just the technique that was wrong. And you can't really. If they hadn't done it, there wouldn't have been anything left. So you mustn't be there.
And did they use a backing material?
I suppose they must have. I haven't really seen that. I did go to see them, but anyway, at the Royal School of Needlework, there was this tapestry that you only worked on when there was nothing else for you to do. And and only undid just enough.
So you never saw the whole thing? How did you feel about working on something without knowing the whole?
At that time, I was being taught, so I did.
And who was your teacher?
Barbara McCready. Barbara.
And
she was trained here at Hampton Court, and she went to work at the Royal School in Newark, and she lived in Kingston, and she used to travel on the bus every day from Kingston to the Royal School, Green Line bus, and there was this handsome young soldier. She couldn't take her eyes off him. And then she discovered he couldn't take her eyes off her either. And then after about 6 months, he spoke to her. I mean, in those days you didn't do things so quickly. And he invited her out. Mm-hmm. And then 2 weeks later, he proposed to her. And then they got married right away.
Did that end her career then, or no?
Well, he was a New Zealander, and he was.
Oh no! So she went to New Zealand.
Yes.
Oh my! Oh dear. So how long did she spend with you at the?
See, I don't. Very nearly the whole time. I think she nearly finished. Mm-hmm. That's good. I better stop.
Yeah. Well, this is day 2. It's July 17th, 1985. And this is an interview with Karen Finch. Well, actually I wanted to pick up on what we were talking about yesterday in the Royal School of Needlework.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if the people like yourself were considered apprentices, or were you considered staff, paid staff, or
I was
students?
staff, yeah.
Staff.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. And then you mentioned, let's see, in the newsletter, the conservation newsletter, about Barbara McCready. She was your teacher, or was she another staff?
She was not a member of staff who had been trained here at Hampton Court Palace.
Uh-huh. Mm. And then yesterday you mentioned Margaret Bartlett.
Yeah. And
how was she? Was she also staff?
Yes, but she is now the head of the workroom.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And what were their backgrounds? Did Barbara Bartlett then, rather?
Margaret Bartlett, yeah. Mm-hmm. And she, like most of the other people, had been trained in the training school at the Royal School of Needlework, which was begun in 1872, I think. Mm-hmm.
And were the techniques then more like what you had experienced at the Rosenborg castle, where it was embroidery, or was it
yes,
weaving?
Well, I suppose the people there had a good training in embroidery. Perhaps, I'm not sure what their training was. But the Royal School of Needlework, of course, included the amazingly complicated techniques of gold work and white work and things like that. I mean, that was a very, very thorough training. If you, these two, it's one over called Burton Daisy. That's part of the diploma work, Two Sisters diploma work.
How wonderful!
Isn't it amazing?
So it looks like it's satin stitch.
Yes.
The background and
it's
the figures.
Split stitch.
Split stitch.
Yes,
oh my gosh.
The kind of technique that was used in the Opus Anglicanum.
And gold work in the halo.
Yeah.
They're beautiful.
One thing from a conservation point of view that you might take note of is that some of the collars changed. I'm sure that saints didn't at any time grow beards.
No.
But this is
not the female, anyway.
I mean, not the female. We've also got the churchwork samplers. I don't know where they are. You should see them before you go, because they're absolutely amazing. Again, from a conservation point of view, they were worked. This was 1917. Mm-hmm. They were worked with aluminium thread, and the aluminium thread powders.
Ah,
And the
yes.
powder is lying on
Actually, I've seen those. They're
Yes.
wonderful.
Yeah, they are, aren't
Des-
they? Yeah.
Despite the problem.
Yeah, despite the problem. But this is, so you can see,
Yeah.
that is...
But the
you know,
quality of work was
Yes.
very fine.
Yes.
In that case, then, you were working at the Royal School of Needlework from 1946 until about
48.
when?
Till Katrina was born.
I was going to ask that.
Yes.
So she was born in 1948 then?
Yes, yeah.
And then did you stay at home for...
Yes, I did until she was 6. I did work at home for the Royal School of Needlework, and I did an awful lot of nice things, including designing toys and you know, and baby clothes, of course.
For sale through the...
Yes, I sold a few things, not a lot, but a few things. And
So then the designs, were they especially for their modern designs?
oh yes,
Yeah.
very much so. I haven't really actually got any patience with anybody who works in designs other than of their own time.
Then what about, let's say, in the beginning, when you were working at the Royal School of Needlework, was this a period when Norman was doing his training, or did he also?
Yeah, and then after that he began to do bookkeeping things. And then he was employed at Walls, Thomas Walls, who makes sausages and ice cream. Not in the
That's
same
right.
factory.
Yes. But so then you at that time were pretty much the breadwinner then? Or, no? Because I was thinking of what you were saying.
Because he was he was funded from his initial training was funded by the army.
I see.
Yes.
Well, that's good. I was thinking with your feminist, you were talking about feminism.
Yeah.
And that was...
Well, so by the time Katrina was born, he was able to support us, and he was in the personnel department at Walls, and I think he really enjoyed that.
Oh, good. Well, this is regressing, I think, a little bit, but is there... at this time, did you meet other conservators? And what I'm thinking of is someone like Agnes Yeager, who was very influential in Sweden.
No, I met... no, because I wasn't thinking really of conservation at that time. I would dearly have liked to continue with the designing and the making of things. That was really what I wanted. That's what I've always wanted to do, or be a housewife. That's my dream.
Really? Yes. That's a surprise.
No, I think that's there's a lot to be said for that. You have a little bit of time. I mean, you can make a little bit of time to do the things that you want to do.
Being a housewife meaning...
making things nice for your family, running the house, having parties, organizing.
Somehow that surprises me. Of all the people, you would be the last one. Just because you seem to keep yourself so busy that it's with outside things that it seems like that would be...
Well, I probably would be outside things too. I mean, there are lots of things that housewives do.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, we lived in Bayswater by then, and we had a flat on the top floor of a house, and I met an awful lot of people, including that I'd met people, when Katrina, when she was expected and in the hospital. I made friends with a person that I met who had a son at exactly the same time as Katrina was born, and we're still friends. He lives in Canada now. We don't see each other a lot, but we still feel quite close. And well, I loved going out, and I love above all else to organize parties. And I haven't done anything that I really want to do for 10 years. Oh. So I should be very, very happy. Yes.
if the housewife could
Yes.
bloom.
Yes.
Well, so then if you were home and working with designs then,
Yeah.
and then how did you get back into conservation?
We got dry rot. What was it? What happened? No. We moved from Bayswater to a house in Acton. And then we discovered that there was dry rot in the floor. And the roof was coming out. And I had to get a job.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
And then I remembered that about conservation in Denmark, National Museum, and the Museum of Decorative Art. And I thought the V&A was bound to have a conservation department too. So I wrote to the keeper of the textile department, George Wingfield Digby, and he invited me to come in and have a look. And I met Mrs. Burkill, who was then in charge of the textile conservation, and we liked each other very much. I then arranged to come in to do tapestries, of course, which was not under Mrs. Burkill, because that was a man's work.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So were there men who had done that before at the
Yes,
V&A?
but unfortunately there were two people, but one was away in a sanatorium and the other was away in the army, or Air Force I think it was. And I didn't meet them till 5 months after.
So then you started alone? And when they came back?
When
how
they
did that-
came back, I wanted to leave. I'd had enough being a civil servant.
Was that difficult? Were they...
Well, my record, I think, should prove that I'm not the best kind of person to just buckle down to rules and regulations. And of course, one of my friends once described the V&A as an elephant with 14 legs, and it needs an awful lot of ability to get them to move in unison.
Yes, any big institution.
Yeah. And yes, well, that was one thing. You see, I could see what I wanted to do, and I think you've read how I developed the tapestry conservation that we're now doing here, and which, in fact, is being followed all over the world. Pleased to say.
Yeah.
And
And that was during those 5 months then that you really...
well, that was when I began it. During that 5 months, because I was, I began it then, but mostly because I saw the futility of what I was doing. Joining of a tapestry, that's the first. So after 5 months, but on the day when I was going to hand in my notice, I was asked to come to Mr. Digby's office. And he told me with a great deal of pleasure that he had managed to persuade the Treasury to make a separate job in the Conservation Department for me. And because they had recognized that I was going to do things. So I stayed for 5 years.
Aha.
And the scars are on my soul still.
Is it, this new job then, it was especially in the tapestries, or was it in general?
Well, it
conservation,
developed
or-
from tapestry to take in cleaning and things. It was up to me to develop, and it developed into taking in cleaning. And I suppose you could say that since cleaning had not been done to any scale in any museum before then, it would have been as well if I'd left that alone. Because I really think that we shouldn't be cleaning textiles as much as we are. And that is why we are now working very consciously on cutting down all the work involved in conservation, to do as little as we can, consistent with what the object is going to be used for. I think that the more we can cut out cleaning, probably the better it is. But at the same time, of course, there's also the fact that silk does seem to benefit from cleaning. Anyway, So yes, I think that the greatest thing was when I was allowed to take out the patches in the sky. You read my thing about that.
But let's see, that was there was a tapestry that had many repairs in the sky, which was silk, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And you then developed the couching method.
Yeah. Yes.
Which you
the beginnings of it. Danielle improved it greatly, and Caroline, I'm sure, has improved it too. I know she has improved it too.
So then, who else was in the V&A at that time? Is it?
Is Evelyn Burkhill.
And are these all in the textiles?
Yes, she was in the textile department. Mine, I was then, I was more or less running a separate. Then the two people who'd been doing tapestries left. And so
the two men.
Yes. And I was, I suppose, then, then the tapestry department was separate, and I was running that. And I had a very good help from, first from Mary Abbott, who's since left conservation, and Jennifer something, I can't remember her name.
How about
I trained them, yes.
How about the two men? Do you remember their names or?
Yeah, John Loxley.
Did he continue?
No, I think he worked at home. Yes. He had been trained by William Morris, or at least by someone in the William Morris work. So, someone who'd been trained to William Morris techniques. So he was very keen on reweaving.
And the other?
I can't remember his name. He's a young man. He was very nice.
Did he also continue? Do you know?
I don't think so. No, I really don't know why, because as far as I was concerned, they just left.
And then let's see. You mentioned Mary and Jennifer and Evelyn. Was it?
Who?
I'm sorry. The first person you mentioned, Evelyn or?
Evelyn Burkhill. Yes, wonderful, marvelous person. She and her husband were both musicians, and she traveled with him all over Europe playing musical instruments.
So, in the setting up of washing, then, was that something that you had to contact sort of the scientists, or was it done on?
Scientists and visiting places where they were doing it. Remember, nothing had ever been done on those lines before, so it was all absolutely new, and you had to sort of start empirically. And so I remember visiting a place that I think it was called either the Grey or the Pink Elephant.
Lots of elephants.
Yes, and I saw the way that they dried costume was by they would put you on sort of bags that could be blown up, so that they dried in shape.
And was this professional dry cleaning or something of that
Dry
sort?
cleaning and washing. A small establishment, I believe. But
was that in London?
Yeah. And then after that we visited a larger establishment. Madeleine Ginsberg came too. She arranged it.
And she was working privately somewhere?
No, Madeleine Ginsberg was in the textile department.
That's right, because she was the keeper rather than, or was she a conservator or both?
No.
Or?
The textile department has the curatorial staff work in the textile department, and they have no conservators work in any of the departments except the conservation department.
So that they were physically in the same area, or no?
No.
They were separated.
Yeah,
Was the contact?
They came to see what we were doing. I had very good contact with them all, but the conservation department, all departments at V&A are very separate, and perhaps I didn't do myself much good by being friends with the textile department.
Well, then
I did, because those were the people I wanted to be with, and they were the people I worked with. But of course, that didn't always please the conservation department.
And the conservation department was.
It was called Artwork Room, incidentally.
So they, in other words, they had more than textiles in the same room, or was it?
Yes.
So metal, or what other fields were there?
Well, in the room where I began to work on tapestries, there were the two goldsmiths.
Mm-hmm.
A man who was lovely person who was repairing glass and ceramics.
And who was he?
His name was George France.
Uh-huh.
Another one who was doing stone and ceramics. His name was Ken Hempel. And Mr. Clark, H.A.D. Clark.
And what was he?
He did miniatures,
Uh-huh.
and I was very, very fond of him too. He has retired now. He lives in the Isle of Wight. He sometimes telephones. He was very, very interested in what I was doing. At that time, the artwork room had a foreman in charge, and he wasn't too keen on people who had more training than he had himself. But luckily, I worked very closely with Mr. Clark, who was interested in what I was doing, and he helped in every way there possibly could be, and so did Mrs. Burkhill, to facilitate that I should develop the methods that they could see would be very useful in conservation.
So then did you also get in contact with others who had been doing washing, or it just wasn't done?
It wasn't done, but one result of all this was that among the people that I came into contact with while I was at Vienna was Louisa Bellinger, and she had started washing at the Textile Museum in Washington, and we would be together all the time that she was in England, and it was absolutely wonderful working with her. She was such fun, so marvelous. When she came to England, she would usually phone from the airport, and then we would fetch her, because by then we lived, because we actually lived very close. And she would stay the night with us, and we would stay up all night talking.
Did you talk about mostly about conservation, or was it
all sorts of things?
Yeah,
all sorts of things, including her house in Washington State, and the nephews and what they were doing, and her childhood.
Mm-hmm.
She was a really fantastic person. That was nice. And then the other people that I made contact then was Tina Lehne from Holland and Johan Ludwigs. They came to England to show the work that they were doing on sticking, and I could see all sorts of good possibilities in what they were doing, and so helped to develop some of the techniques. And of course we've been friends ever since. And last week in Hungary, Johan Ludwigs was there too.
So then, what was the method then that you came up with? Was it
you see, things begin really on a small scale. One of them was that they, at the Victorian Albert Museum, they had a sort of thing that was about this wide,
it's
trough.
About a meter wide or so.
Trough, with a space in the middle and troughs on either side, and the tapestries would go in.
Would they re-roll on a roll?
No, they sort of dump in.
Dump in, okay.
And then you pulled it up to the middle, and then it went over to the other side. But of course, it took an enormous long time, and all the dirt.
All the weight.
Yeah, yes, it was very damaging. And all the dirt stayed in the water, and it was very, very difficult. And then eventually, when it was finished, it was dragged onto a hoist and lifted up, and a fan was put on. I didn't think it was very good. So I began by putting a large board on top of this, because that was bricks, and you couldn't just move it, you had to. So a large board so that the tapestries could be flat on. Of course, it was a little bit dangerous because the board wasn't all that safe, and balancing on that and trying to make it work. But at any rate, yes, I began the method of washing tapestries that we're still doing.
So that, in other words, it was a method where it could be washed all at once and flat?
Yes, yeah, and left to dry.
And left to dry in the same place?
Yeah, and then that's when I discovered about that old repairs might run.
Oh, yes.
There was one occasion when I had to run around to find all the newspaper and all the rags that they were using in the carpentry department to mop it up so that it wouldn't run. I succeeded. Yeah, and then I also discovered how you can manipulate old textiles there, because I was asked to do the vestments that belonged to a traveling priest, 17th century I think they were, and one of them, the Alp, had stretched enormously, totally out of shape. But when it was wet, it could quite easily be manipulated into shape again, which was very nice. So it looked quite nice on display. Yes, and then the gloves and things, the 17th century work, 16th, 17th century work that you can see on display in 64 Rome. That was when I began to clean gold work. Now those things were black because the dust had settled on the gold. So you couldn't do anything about changing the color. It wasn't just that it was tarnished, they were dirty. And that's when I began to develop methods to try to get rid of the dirt. And that had to be done physically, picking up every little bit on the tip of a saber brush. Then I think that now perhaps a better method is using little bits of cotton wool on stilts. And I used ammonia, but not enough to wet through the gold, just to get rid of that dirt on the gold. It worked very nicely. But in those days I thought it was necessary to lacquer things, and that I now know is a total mistake, because of course you can only lacquer what you can see on the top of the embroidery. Still, after 17 years I had occasion to look at the things again, and I'm glad to say that they hadn't changed, which is more a tribute to the quality of the cases at the V&A than it is to anything that I did. Because we did similar work on other things later. I did them after I left V&A, and they were darkened in a year because they were kept in National Trust houses in open condition. And of course that in itself taught me an awful lot about how little you should really do. I mean, clean things like that if they're dirty and it's bad, but don't go to excessive lengths about changing discoloration due to tarnish, because it's going to happen again, and you cause damage every time you touch it. It's a question of using the proper display methods with light and presentation generally to make the public like it, because it doesn't really matter that it doesn't look nice all the way around.
Yeah.
That's it doesn't matter as long as what the public sees. In any case, why shouldn't the public see the tooth of time?
Yes.
Teeth of time.
Many.
Yeah.
Well, in that case, you also mentioned that, with the washing, then, did you also look into detergents and surfactants?
Yeah, but this was the thing with our friends from Holland. They then became very, very interested in this whole aspect. And a research program was started at the... eventually the central laboratory was set up in Holland. But before that, a research program was started at Delft, at the textile high school, Delft. You can get the proper dresses from somewhere else. And Judith Huffington came up with her recipes and this was all presented in 1964 at a meeting in Delft.
And this is when you were by this time you were annealing in your home.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. And before that, then, was cleaning done with just water, or?
Yeah, water and lysopol, which turned into Simperonic.
So you are already using non-ionic before it was even...
Yes. Well, that was because of Louisa Beringer, because I began using the methods that she had started at the Textile Museum.
And Agnes Geir, was she about, or is
Yes. She was starting all these things in Sweden, and of course it all filtered through. And now
When
we've
did
got
you
it.
first meet her? Was she?
That was quite late. And well, it was. I think I met her while I was at the Victorian Albert Museum, but I don't think that I really got to understand what she was doing too late.
And then, let's see. What was? Well, you were there for 5 years, and what finally made you decide to break away from the 14-legged?
Someone said to me, all we want from you people is just enough technical knowledge to be able to tell you what the keepers, to be able to do what the keepers tell you to do. And I didn't fancy that.
And how about the keepers then? Were they? Did you kept a very good relationship throughout?
Yes.
So.
Yeah, this was someone else.
Someone from outside.
Yeah, someone from another department. No, the textile department was just fantastic. I was very, very pleased to work with him. And as you know, Donald King became our president when we started this, and he has got a lot to do with setting up the centre. Without him, it just wouldn't have happened. So when I left the V&A, you see, they kept. I wanted to become a housewife and take up design and everything, and do all the things that I'd done before, including my interest in ancient techniques was stimulated by the work I was doing at the Victorian Albert Museum and being able to handle so many interesting things. And so I began to work on that right away. And then, no one at the V&A really believed that was what I wanted to do. They kept sending nice people with nice things.
I wouldn't have believed you either.
And I couldn't say no. And then after 2 years, they asked me if I would train someone else in tapestry conservation from a new person.
So did they find a replacement for you?
Well, I trained, Mary had left by this time, and I trained Jennifer. Funny, I can't remember her name. I can see what she looks like, I can't remember her name. And so she stayed for 2 years, and then Janet Notman got the job, and she had been trained in weaving at the Central College of Art by Marianne Straub, who had also trained Mary Abbott. And I realized that they were doing fantastic work, you see, because of the background that Marianne had helped to produce.
And Marianne, where was she from?
Marianne Straub. She is a textile pioneer. She has designed for industry an awful lot. We've got a book by her in the library where you can read all about her.
Where is she based? In what country?
She's always in England, but she came from Switzerland, and she lives in Manchester now. And she has also become more and more interested in ancient techniques, and she's a member of the study group
for the ancient techniques.
Yeah. And so Janet came, and that I suppose began to develop my techniques of teaching, including a sampler, tapestry sampler, and what it had to contain. And it was bigger then than it is now, but substantially the same thing.
I mean, in the training they had to do...
Yeah, begin by doing it. So. Janet didn't have to do it, but we began to think about it, you see, and we continued to work quite closely together.
Something like what's done here for the general training now at the Textile Conservation Center, where you do the stitching samples.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
When I get more time, I want to really get to develop that aspect, because it is tremendously important, but it does need someone with a training in textile to do it.
Yes.
And of course right now we haven't got anybody who's got a training in textile.
Meaning textile techniques, or...
Yeah, well, in weaving or design or embroidery or anything like that. It may be that I shouldn't have been so insistent on on it being more important, on people's attitude to conservation being more important than their textile background. Because you see, I think that people are doing absolutely marvelous work on conservation, but perhaps because of the background that they've got here in the techniques, in first we continue to teach very rigorously. But since when we began here at the centre, there were many of my friends still, able to come and teach different aspects of it according to. But bit by bit, you see, they had to do other things, look after husbands and things. And so now that is one thing I'd really like to get back to what it was. Including that we always had a box for each lecture that I gave, so that it wasn't so much a lecture as a demonstration. But the boxes grew too big, and it seemed better that they should be put into appropriate boxes.
Mm-hmm.
That's something else.
Well, let's see, if we go back to Ealing and how all the students that kept coming, so you really didn't ask for students, and you weren't. Never. Were you actually working on things for the V&A or for private people, or how did you get your commissions?
For the V&A, and also for they suggested that people should come to me. One of them was Charles Stewart, who since gave his collection of costume to the Royal Scottish Museum. You've heard about it, I think.
Yes.
And we had a marvellous relationship, still do. And I don't know, I think I must probably have done some 200 dresses of different ages for him. And more dolls than that. Not for him, but for everybody. Mm-hmm. So I began to work for the Jeffrey Museum, the Horniman Museum, the National Trust, of course. All sorts of, mainly, I think more museums than private people, really. Mm-hmm. And then the next person I was asked to teach was from Holland, and I really didn't. Wow, you see, I mean, it was good. I didn't really want to be doing all that.
Was it when you got a student, then did you have to make a commitment to them, or did they have to make a commitment to you of being there for certain times? Or no.
You see, if people, you see, I had all this work, and so I said I can only teach you practical things. I haven't got the facilities to teach you the science. You'll have to get that from somewhere else. I can only teach you practical things, and then you work, and that will pay for your tuition. And many of them stayed with us. It was great fun, really. And then we had people from Holland, and then more people from the V&A.
Do you have a list of all the people that came through?
Somewhere there is a list. Greta made a list.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And how about Greta? How does she fit into all of this?
Well, you see, that was the most marvellous thing. She was married to Norman's brother.
And this is.
Yeah.
And what was Greta's name before?
Finch.
Finch?
Before that, I don't know. I mean, see, Norman's brother was Finch, so yes, of course yes.
But
and then he died.
Putnam,
Greta, and then he died, and that was when Greta came to London to live, and then she met Len, and they were married.
I see. So it's Len Putnam.
Yes.
I see.
Yes, and they lived in Chiswick first, and we started to work together from immediately I left the V&A Museum. Greta would help with the as a secretary, and with the work, and she would lecture, and we wrote things together, and we worked very, very closely. We still do, but of course now she's getting very tired, and she can't. We're going over this afternoon to try to finish the revision of the book.
Oh, wonderful!
Yeah.
Caring for textiles.
Yeah, it's going to be called something else.
Oh, is it?
The care and preservation of textiles, I think.
I noticed that the museum bookshop is already announcing
that it's coming.
That it's coming.
Yeah, it's got 2 more chapters. One on presentation, really, because of what we've just been saying. You should do as little as possible and leave the rest to presentation. And I thought so I put in a chapter about colour, which interests me a lot, and I've forgotten what the other chapter is. So
Greta was there from the very start.
Yes.
Which
he was so much part of it that it doesn't, did I forget, I don't take it for granted, but I forget to think about it because he was part of everything that we did.
And did she take an interest in it before, when you're still at the V&A, or did it start when you came back to Ealing?
I think that they all just simply wanted me to leave the V&A as quickly as possible.
So then...
Because it was really much more fun being at home. I could organize my own time and do everything. From the beginning, I wanted things to be organized in such a way that I wasn't responsible for anybody eating, so I wouldn't employ anybody. And also so that, given that we finished any undertaking that we had taken on, I would be able to just stop and not do any more. This was the idea.
Mm-hmm. And did you have things that concern the center right now, such as estimating and that sort of thing? Was that a difficult proposition? Because going into
Danielle joined the circus, if you like, in 1964. Very much part-time, because he had Laura to bring up, of course, and look after her husband Paul. And
this is Danielle Baswick.
Yeah, and we began to work more closely together from 1967, I think it was. And what was it you asked?
Well, it's just...
it's estimating, yes, that was the thing. So we had to learn to do estimating. And the only way that we could think that it would be fair to the client, since we had all these people about who weren't trained, was that we estimated on the time that we thought she would take to do, or I would take to do. Then we would each of us estimate separately. And she would count in French, and I would count in Danish. That's great.
And then did you get together in English?
Yeah, and then when we'd finished, I would 3-double everything she said and double what I said, and then we would take an average. And it didn't work out too badly for us. But one of the things about it is that that way of estimating is probably a good way. But what you have to take into account really is that we worked, both of us, very fast. Mm-hmm. And even with the compensations, the handicaps that I put on, it couldn't. Here we've had to change all that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, then, what about?
And no one kept the books,
Uh-huh.
because obviously we had to pay tax and everything. But as I said, I wouldn't employ anybody, so we didn't have any problems with salaries or VAT. Well, then eventually VAT was introduced.
Do you remember when that was?
I don't know, I think it was.
It's not important.
Yeah, but it did mean that we couldn't go on working like that. And that was when I really thought, this is enough. Got it. Enough's enough. And how far are you going to take us today, and what is the time?
It's now 10 to 11.
I will have a few
We
more
have a
minutes.
few more minutes.
Yes. In 1969 I got ill. I had to have a terrible operation, kidney. And I had to recover in all that mess.
That took a long time.
Yeah. And we were fantastically lucky. We always had the most marvelous au pair girls. On one occasion we had a Swedish ballet dancer living with us, and a Danish and and two au pairs, a Danish and a Norwegian. They did all sorts of other things. I mean, they mostly just stayed with us and paid for the board and lodging by working.
Taking care of Christina.
Katrina,
excuse me. Oh dear.
Yeah, all sorts of things, all sorts of things. It was just, I visit them when I'm in Denmark, of course, and the Danish ones, and the others come to visit us from time to time. It was lovely, and they did a lot to have. Oh yes, and Katrina's friends would sometimes move in with us too.
It sounds like a busy household.
It was, yes, it was amazing, really.
Did the students who came, did they stay with you? Or
Sometimes they did.
Even crazier.
Sometimes they didn't. Those who stayed, some had found places to stay in the area. And it depends on how long time they were going to stay. Oh, I remember one Czechoslovakian girl making Czechoslovakian dumplings for us all. That was with apricots. Absolutely amazing. Oh, it was wonderful. And that was in the middle of having builders in, so they had to taste them too. We had builders in to change various things in the house. And
to adapt it to your needs for conservation or for expanding people?
No, I think it was for needs for conservation. Oh, I'm changing the kitchen, all sorts of things. And oh yes, one Katrina's friend who was training to become a theatre manager stayed with us. She was a very good cook.
So then,
well then you see 69, 70. I began to think that enough's enough, you see. And then in the beginning of 71, I had really got all the ideas for the centre clear in my head. And with Greta's help. And oh yes, and we put it together, what we called a memorandum, to putting the needs of the country and things for textile conservation. I took that to show to Mr. Wingfield Digby at the Victoria and Albert Museum. And he looked at it, and he read it, and he said, "You shouldn't have left here, should you?" And I thought, that wasn't the response I had expected. There must be something wrong with this. So on the way back in the train, I realized what was wrong with it was that he, in common with all the people for whom we had been working, didn't know how much work we were actually doing.
You mean at home?
Yeah. So I had kept diaries and, of course, records of everything. So I spent 3 weeks on listing all the work we had done, the hours, everything, for the whole of 1970. Came to 11,000 hours, I think.
Oh my gosh.
And an awful lot of work. And then we sent that to the people for whom we'd been working, and we asked them to come to a meeting. Is it still working?
Yes, but I think it would be better to change tape just for we'll finish this and...
Yeah. And then, sorry.
Okay.
And so we sent
This list of...
yes, and together with the memorandum to all the people for whom we've been working. National Trust, the Lord Chamberlain's Office, the Area Museum Services. Our first chairman was the director of the Area Museum Service. His name is Richard Harrison. He's now in charge of the Mary Rose. Yeah. And then we called a meeting of them all in our house in Ealing. There were 19 people, I think, all around our table in our sitting room, with the cats sort of bouncing around, licking their fingers, and said, "Now we've got this. we know what should be done. I would be quite happy just simply to stop working, finish what we have on hand, and or send it back to the people so that you can start something else between yourself. If, on the other hand, you would want us to start it, we'll do that too. But things must change. We can't go on like this. There were many things, including security, and it was really impossible.
Was it also that you were getting more demands for training?
Yes.
And
yes.
Objects also, or
yes, and having to say again and again, this is not training. You must not consider it to be training, because to be a properly trained textile conservator, you must have the appropriate science. You cannot ever consider yourself trained conservators because you've been here and doing some stitching. And it got worse and worse, because you see, the more it became fashionable, of course, the more people, And that was one thing. And then there was the security of the house. We had 34 locks that had to be checked every night before we got in. Every time I went anywhere, which was very, very rare, I would be worrying in case, sort of looking for signs of burning on the horizon as we neared home. It was terrible. I was absolutely convinced that nothing could be worse than that terrible anxiety, having so many valuable things on the premises, and nation's treasures, and yeah.
So the committee then, did they agree with you that there was this great need after you?
They all agreed with that, yes. And then Donald King, Alan Thomas, and John Nevinson were appointed as ad hoc committee for the purpose of getting the charitable status. And Alan Thomas started to work on that right away.
And I know Donald King is like keeper
of the
textiles at the
he was.
He was. Yeah. And then I'm not familiar with the other names.
John Nevinson is textile historian, late of the Victorian era.
Of course, yes.
And Alan Thomas is our lawyer, solicitor.
Okay.
Yeah. And his wife was then the secretary of the Costume Society, and knew what we were doing, and he was fascinated by it. He's been wonderful in all of this. Everybody.
So then it was decided that what year was this? 71.
72.
Or 72.
That the meeting was called. Yeah, and then it took 3 years to get the charitable status, because no one could really understand what we were going to do. And then we were offered space at a place called Whittlesford Mill near Cambridge. And that would have meant changing universities. I wasn't very happy about that, because I was quite happy with the Courtauld Institute. But at the same time, it was the only space we were offered. Well, that's not quite true. Wesleyan College too, but we didn't think that was the right place. Because we'd only have courses lasting 1 year there, and I wouldn't contemplate that. And then in 73, the textile conservation course with the Courtauld Institute began. It all took place in our house. And
was that did that come from the earlier meetings?
No, that came from the Courtauld Institute. Nothing to do with it.
So that was arranged by you and Greta then with the Courtauld?
Yes, and Stella Newton.
And he was...
Stella Newton.
Stella, excuse me.
She had started the history dress course. So I had begun to teach with the Courtauld Institute in 68 or 69. Teaching about techniques and about, textile history. We really wanted to stay with them, but at the same time there was this offer. But the thing about it was that we would need to raise about £250,000. It's not as much now as it was then, but it was still enough not to want to do it from our house with consequent publicity and everything. So we began to whine an awful lot, including to the Lord Chamberlain about space, just temporary space. so we could raise that. So we were offered this for 2 years.
Uh-huh.
And
Well, maybe this is a good point.
Yes.
We can pick up tomorrow then.
I think this.
Thank you.
Where did we get to yesterday?
Well, yesterday we got to when the committee was set up to get the palace location, or the Grace and Favor.
No, the
apartment.
committee was set up to get charitable status.
That's right.
Yes.
Excuse me.
Yes, and the offers of a space to come came from other people who were interested in supporting the work. They were offers we didn't approach anybody at all. They were all of them offers, except, well, perhaps we certainly let our wishes be known. Mm-hmm. And that's, as I said, eventually resulted. So one day, you see, we had a phone call. Art Paris, how much space do you want? 10,000 square feet. There was an appreciable pause. And then the person said, what would you say to 3,000? And I thought for fully half a second. And then I said, move in. And I don't think that the implications were lost. So at any rate, I'm sure that's why we're now about to take possession of the last space that will make up 10,000 square feet.
I didn't realize that. That's wonderful.
Yes. So that means that, you see, until now, we have had to cope with very restricted space. And of course, in particular, the office accommodation has been little. At first, we had only one office, shared by about 7 people, 2 typewriters and 2 telephones. That wasn't the joke at all. It's a bit better now, but it's still not very good because, for example, I've never had an office on my own, which I should have. I shall have that in the next apartment, of course. No, I shan't, because now we're going to have the director that I always hoped for, so I shall still be sharing it. But that's something else. So, you see, all the plans were really worked out well before. And in fact, plans were worked out before we sent out the memorandum. And at that time, I thought they were
memorandum was
with the list that we sent to all the people, to
the list of how much you did in
yes,
the hours.
1970. Yeah, I'll show you a copy of that. In fact, I think I might be able to give you a copy. What next? Yes, I'd worked out everything beforehand, but I thought to myself that they were only tentative proposals, necessary because otherwise people wouldn't know what we had in mind. But it's absolutely amazing how everything has come back to those original proposals, so that in fact, with the advent of a director, we still probably have fulfilled all the expectations we had. Because I have never... I think that you already know that from what I've said before. I've never wanted to have anything to do with the administration. I said, I'll put it together and I'll make it work. And I have. I also said I'll have nothing at all to do with the money. And unfortunately, that didn't work out. I've had to be very concerned about the money all the time. Luckily, I've been able to raise between 60 and 70,000 pounds every year. So we have covered all the shortfalls, and that has also covered the cost of the training of the apprentices, because I think you know that they're paid salary during the training. And that money, of course, had to be raised from somewhere, and I did that.
Actually, on that point, why, how did it get started in the beginning that you had 2 lines, one a courtauld and one an apprenticeship system? Because that's unusual, it seems.
I think it is unusual, and the reason for that is that that was one thing that wasn't planned originally, but we'd started the course with the Courtauld Institute in 1973. And in the course of setting up the centre, we were offered help by the Crafts Advisory Committee, which later turned into the Crafts Council. We had put together, when we were offered the space at Cambridge, I put together a list of equipment that we needed that came to about, I can't quite remember, but I suppose it must have been about £70,000, something like that. And the Crafts Advisory Committee offered to give about £30,000 of that. Unfortunately, when we had to move in here temporarily, they decided only to give us half of that. Yes.
Because it was temporary then?
Because it was temporary at first. And then they were going to give us the rest when we got into our permanent home.
Have you contacted them lately now that they're permanent? Okay.
Have I just? But either they spent the money or they changed their mind. At any rate, we never got that. We got half of it, and then we got a little bit more over the years. But yes, and one of the things that they didn't want to do, they didn't want to support a course in textile conservation that was run with the Cultural Institute of Art, because they claimed that if the Cultural Institute of Art wanted to run a course, they could pay for it, which unfortunately, of course, they couldn't. So, but they said, but we can help you with an apprenticeship scheme. And stupidly, we accepted that. And then all they ever gave was about £1,000 for each person, whom we were paying between £3,000 and £5,000. I mean, at 3,000 in the beginning, and then it rose up to that. So that was a dead loss and a terrible waste of energy and time, because that then forced me to go out and raise the rest of the money for the training. And anyway, I did it, and we trained people, and of course not all of them could stay, but I mean we have the majority. The aim was to get 10 trained people in the tapestry room.
So about how many apprentices have gone through the centre?
I think 3 people have left for various reasons. There's Stephen at the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, chief restorer, and Annabelle Wells, whose husband moved away, and Fiona, who left to go to do private work.
So then
and then there were some who only did 2 years of the course.
So about 12 or 15 then have actually gone through.
Yeah, it's all there in the list.
And when did I know there's the Courtauld, which started off as a shorter course. I've forgotten how long that started off.
Yeah, because money was raised for 2 courses of 2 years each. But we felt that it was really too short. At least it's too short the way that it was arranged to fit in with the terms of an English university. I suppose we could contract it into 2 years if we changed the system a little and had 5 months terms with a month in between each. See? It could, and then it would of course also reduce the cost for 1 whole year.
Yeah. And then when was it changed to a 3-year course, the present 3-year course?
In 1977. That was when the... now that also is in the list. We had a year to change the course from 2 years to 3. And then began again.
So was it very much more practical than training in the first 2 years? Or the 2-year course?
No, because the Cultural Institute provided some of the science teaching. You remember that I said I didn't want to run a course that didn't have a proper science background. And so we got that. And then the Leverhulme Trust offered to fund a scientist for 3 years, which they lengthened we did a second program for a further 3 years. So we had 6 years to employ scientists from Leverhulme Trust. And of course now we have Nick whom we pay ourselves.
So when did Anthony Smith then, that's the first scientist that was employed here, when did he start? Is that...
I think you better look it up in the records, because I can't remember the year. I suppose it must be 77.
More important then would be, why did you feel that you needed somebody full-time here at the center, and what?
Oh, because I did know, of course, that no one before had worked full-time textile conservators, but I thought that there were too many things left to chance everywhere, and that, you know, in any case, from the point of view of teaching, it would be absolutely essential to have a scientist to actually run the science side of conservation.
And where did you find this person to?
Well,
how did you go about looking?
When we were told that we might find a person, I spoke to the keepers of the conservation at the Victoria and Albert Museum, the British Museum, and the Glasgow Museum. And later, I think, we widened it to Cardiff. And the British Museum had been employing, Tony Smith had worked at the British Museum for 3 years on a research fellowship, also from the Leverhulme Trust. And they were terribly, terribly impressed with him, but civil service regulations at that time made it impossible to employ him there. And they suggested, and Tony came to visit, and we all thought that he was absolutely marvellous, and that it would be a very good thing to begin. So then the question was where to begin, because of course since we didn't have any precedents to look for anywhere, it was a question of really hard. Now Tony had a long background in chemistry, and then the time spent in a museum, so he knew what all that was about. And, and so when he started here, I suggested, he wanted to know what I expected him to do, and I said I really think that perhaps it will be better that you find out for yourself, because it's impossible to say since we haven't got precedents for a job like yours. So if you talk with people and look at the work that's being done, and you know what you think, and then after about a week he came back and said, everybody wants me to teach, will that be all right? And I said, of course, that would be just perfect. And then he began to put it together. I suppose it took him about 2 years to really get into the thing about textiles and so on.
Because his background wasn't textiles, was it?
No, organic chemistry.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that it's fair to say that he did extremely well. We're very, very pleased, and of course we were terribly, terribly sorry to lose him. But one of the things about the centre is that it's all new, and you certainly can't growth is terribly important, whichever direction it is. And we're very pleased to have Nick now. Like Tony, he's had to take some time to get into it. It couldn't be any other way. But of course, people do expect an awful lot from the second person in any job, because they always think that they can continue where the first person left off. But of course, that's impossible.
And Nick's background is more conservation oriented.
Yes, because of his background from Durham University and then the Courtauld Institute. So he's done 2 courses, one in physics and chemistry, I think, from Durham, and the other in conservation at the Courtauld Institute. So,
actually, let's change the subject a little bit now. Actually, quite a bit. I was just curious about your title OBE. What does it mean, and when did you get it, and what were the circumstances?
It means an officer of the Order of the British Empire. And I will give you all the books to read about it. It is I suppose, for married. And I suppose it was because of the work that I had done in conservation. It was 1976. And I'm very pleased, of course, and proud to be recognized. Obviously, it's not just for me. It's all the people who helped to get it going. It's for Greta and Norman and Danielle and everybody else who helped to get it started. And it was quite amazing, really, because being my family in Denmark, see, I tell you terrible stories on this tape too.
Oh, sure. That's what it's for.
My family in Denmark are not very easily impressed. We're all peasants, and peasants don't really show anything like that. And I wrote and told them about it, of course, and they were very pleased and congratulated me. And then that was the end of that, because as far as they were concerned, if I had done something that was worth doing, then obviously I ought to have some recognition for it. And that was that. Then my brother-in-law, who was Australian, came back from sea. He captains those super tankers. He came back from sea, and he's a very royalist Australian, you see. And he wasn't at all satisfied with what he considered a lukewarm reception of this great honour that had been bestowed on me. And he did everything he could to make them see how marvellous it was, especially for a foreigner, and all those things. And they just sat there, because we're all very good at that, just sitting there and letting everything pass over us and not showing any feelings about anything. But eventually he remembered the thing that really clinched it. He remembered that the Danish order of the Knight of Dannebrog, Dannebrog, can't be used for anything, really. I mean, you can't put it on your letter heading as you can the OB or anything like that. You do, however, have it on your gravestone when you die. And he remembered that. And he said, you must get her home when she dies. She'll be such an ornament to the churchyard.
Oh, dear.
That did it. They couldn't resist any longer. I mean, my sister, who's not all that free spending with money or anything, rushed to the telephone to tell me immediately. I thought that was really something.
Leave it to the Australians.
Yes. Well, what else?
Well, another accomplishment that you have is your book that you've written, Caring for Textiles.
Mm.
Could you talk a little bit about what made you do it and
that book is written from a definite angle.
Mm.
And it came about because of all the years working very closely with the National Trust and all the people looking after the houses.
Mm-hmm.
and also other historic houses, naturally, not only the National Trust. And in fact, also a number of museum people in provincial museums. They would ask advice, and we would give advice on everything that they asked. And eventually we discovered that really the advice we were given was practically the same in all cases. And we thought it's really an awful waste of time that, repeating it all the time, writing it in a slightly different form to them all the time. So Greta and I got together to write it all down, the advice that we thought that would be useful for the people who had suddenly found themselves having to care for a collection of textiles without being trained for it and without really very often being able to get any training for it, because it wasn't their main thing. So that's how it began. And then a publisher came along and asked if we'd like it published, and we thought that was quite a good idea. And then Danielle did the drawings, and we found photographs. They're not all that good, but it's the best we could do. And we were a bit put out when it was suddenly not published any longer. That was because the publishers amalgamated with another firm and eventually went out of existence. And so we were fed up with that. But of course we could take photocopies out of it to the people who asked advice. And then we were asked if we would like to have it republished by another publisher. Batchford asked.
And that was last year or so?
Something like that, perhaps 2 years ago. It takes time, all these things.
And so, what have you decided to change, and what?
Well, you see, then we had a meeting about this, and I said I'm not really desperately keen on the cover. Oh, you can have another cover. I'm not too desperately happy about the title either. So we changed that to the care and preservation of textiles, and then I suppose we got a bit bolder, seeing that everything seemed to. And we said, could we change one or two things? Yes, and if you like to write some more, feel free. So we wrote 2 more chapters, changed various things, wrote 2 more chapters, one about volunteers and the other about colour, which is a subject that I'm very keen on. I think we talked about that before.
In private.
Did we?
Yes.
Not on tape.
No.
Well, it's all tied up with the next time that I've been working in textiles and seeing how much damage can be done by conservation. And that it would really be much, much better if one could use a lot more preventive conservation measures and try to keep things safe in that way. Well, obviously, there will always be things that have to be worked on, like tapestries or little dresses worn by Egyptian dolls. Yes. But and archaeological material, stuff like that. If one could aim at preventive conservation, and colour is a very good thing to use for that, because by choosing the right coloured background, you can make an object look an awful lot better than it really is. That's in the cases, of course, and by understanding a little bit about symbolism, you can probably also make people see things that they don't, that are not actually there, but use their minds to supply it. And so I put this lecture together. I put this together as a lecture for a lecture series I was given for Sotheby's, and on their, because they run several courses on historic material, and gave it there first, and then I suddenly had to give another lecture to museum people, museums arranged by the Area Museum Service, I think. And gave it again there, and that was absolutely marvelous, because I had been a little bit worried in case I had got too much material, too complicated. But it was lovely. Everybody thought that it was great, and began to work on it right away. Good. So that was nice.
On the other subject, or the other chapter that you've added, the volunteers. Yeah. Does that come out of work that you did for setting up Knoll, for instance, and the workshop at Knoll?
In a sort of way, yes. In a sort of way, it came from that. See, that began in 1969 already, because that was when I was asked to survey the textiles at Knoll. Again, that was a very difficult thing, because no one had ever done a survey of textiles from the point of view of conservation in any house before. And we didn't have any precedents. I did try to find out what the National Trust would like, but it was really all too floating. So I thought the only thing to do is to go by the guidebook and go through the house according to the guidebook and look at all the textiles that are in each room. And it took 2 years to do, interspersed with this operation I told you about yesterday and recovering from it. I still remember walking around covered with a horse blanket in the middle of the winter cold and making notes with gloves on.
Cold.
It is the coldest house I know, I think. Oh, that was hard. And John Nevinson, whom I told you about before, helped, and Lisbeth Geddes, they gave historic advice on embroideries. And Greta, of course, did all the paperwork. And so that took 2 years. And included in the advice was that some emergency measure we could do to the bed.
This is the king's bed.
The king's bed, yes. I recognized that it would be a very, very big job, but that it might not be possible really to get anything done that time. I knew that the bed had cost £40,000 when it was new.
Which was, do you remember the year?
1680, round about the 1680, between 80 and 85, because, from 1685 on or something. It must be in the paper somewhere.
Okay.
And the thing was that while I was working at the Royal School of Needlework, those curtains had come in for repair to the lining, and I was fascinated by the lining. I did most of the work on that, covering with a sort of fishnet stitch that was just simply holding things in place, but not really very pretty. And so when I saw the bed again and realized by this time that was probably the only textile in the house, apart from tapestries and rugs, that could be made to look anything like it had looked originally, I felt that something ought to be done. And I put forward this proposal for an emergency treatment. And it was like that until I think it was 1973, 1972, 73 it must be. And the National Trust asked if we would do something about it then. I went down to look and discovered that really we couldn't do the emergency treatment anymore. It was too late for that. And
there was that much more deterioration.
Yes, yes. And then I thought, now, one thing about this bed is that the repeat of the weave is only about 50 centimeters. Not very much. And that probably it was the only thing that I had ever seen that could be done by volunteers, because anybody good with their hands could be taught to do that, a small repeat like that.
So it involved, let's see if I remember right, it's laid in couched metal work, isn't it?
Yes.
So
Well, originally it was woven, but originally it was woven.
It was it?
Yes.
Oh, how fabulous.
Yes, woven.
Mm-hmm.
A lampas weave, which means that it's got about 3 different weaves in
That's
it.
right. Okay.
Yes. It was dirty because it needed cleaning, all sorts of things like that. But I could see the possibilities. Something else I could see very clearly was that we certainly couldn't undertake it because, both because of space but more particularly because it would be a very, very long job, and I couldn't see any trained conservators wanting to stick it. I did think that a large number of volunteers who really wanted to keep the heritage safe would be able to stand the boredom and the repetitiousness of the work. And that was, so I put that idea to the National Trust, and they jumped at it, both feet. which I suppose I should be pleased about. The only thing was that it did lead to an awful lot more that probably wasn't so good. But I don't know. I think that if we could find some arrangement whereby it could be very clearly seen what could be volunteer work and what has to be done by professionals, it probably would be quite a good idea. Something else is that none of it should be done without supervision by a properly trained conservator. Of course, at that time we didn't have any properly trained conservators. And, anyway, it was started, and now Annabelle Wiley has very nearly finished it, and I think it's absolutely marvelous.
And
She's
Annabelle
doing
is a center-trained conservator.
Yes.
And she picked up the project.
In halfway. Well, no, I don't know how much work had been done. I think one curtain was finished.
And before that time, then was it who took over the supervision? No.
I'm glad that the work was put up, and I'm glad that it has gone, and I'm very, very pleased that Annabelle has got it.
Let's see.
It's got it together.
Well, let's since you talked a little bit about untrained, well, or not. Let's put it this way: people who weren't trained at the time. This is a sort of general question, which I would be curious to know your feelings on, and that is, what do you think about untrained practitioners who may be in positions as conservators and could be also damaging historic textiles?
That is really a very, very difficult question. Obviously, it would be best that we had trained conservators. Equally obviously, it's a new profession, and there are many people working who you could say haven't got training, and many of those have learned on the job and are doing extremely good work. There may be some who are in the positions who have caused damage, but hopefully they will have learned from their mistakes. And it's a very difficult question to answer, because it's like any other profession that has begun. You have to begin somewhere.
I'm not quite sure what the background for setting up the one-year course at the center. Was that just to help this sort of situation for people who were in positions who had responsibility?
Yes, it was. And amazingly, the demand for the course came to an end at the same time as the decision to stop it. It wasn't because
that decision. What was that based on?
The difficult. You see, you know that we've never had as much staff here as we would like, for economic reasons. And one of the things about all of this is that to teach, we need a number of people for the teaching, and the ratio of teaching to students, the lowest ratio of student to teachers is 7:1, and that's an awful lot of people in conservation, and we just simply could not accept that situation, because it really is impossible. And consequently, of course, it may seem that the fees that people have to pay are high. In actual fact, they've never paid the full cost. They certainly didn't.
For running
the teaching department. And certainly in the beginning, it was even worse, because at that time we were trying to work within the fees that were normally paid by British students, which were lower than ones paid by foreign students. So that was extremely difficult. Now, of course, people who had already got long training in practical work would, for the most part, be quite pleased just to have the theory. But there were people who desperately felt the need for practical work as well. And I think you can imagine how difficult it was to fit both practical and theoretical work into the first year and do equal justice to both the Courtauld Institute diploma students and to the people on the 1-year course.
Mm-hmm.
And it sort of got worse rather than better. And we had to decide that we either had to spread it over a longer time or change it the way that we have. Now, one of the things about that is that we spread this theory over 2 years in the beginning for the, after that, for the diploma students. And then, as you know, we now find that really would be much better for people to concentrate on theory during the first year, and in order to do more practical work during the second year, because practice, as you know, makes perfect. And if you haven't got, and for practical work, you really do need concentrated time on it in order to achieve both the necessary skill and the beginnings, at any rate, of the necessary speed, because it is, as you also know, labor-intensive work. And though we now have begun to take it for granted that people should pay the proper rate for conservation, it's still very difficult to ask people to pay for the enormous length of time that we could spend. Yeah.
So you're now talking about the clients that the centre now charges.
No, I am talking about trying to give the students the necessary speed. To try to make it clear that that besides the skills, we do need to be able to work at some speed.
I see. And this is sort of going back a bit, but when you started off then here at the palace, about how many staff did you have, and how has that grown to the present?
Well, when we began, there was myself, Greta, Danielle. Stephen started very soon after. He'd done the course in tapestry weaving at Westdean College, which was also set up, because of all the interest generated by setting up the centre.
And Steve's last name?
Stephen Cousins, yeah. Then we had help from many friends who came and did special lectures and things like that. And then...
There were how many students about at that time? Do you remember?
When the second course with the Courtauld Institute was done at the palace, and there was an overlap, yes, in the second. So that involved, you better find the names, but at any rate, Marion was one of them. And Dinah was doing a course at in Manchester, and she came to the centre. She'd started with us in Ealing, and while she was still at school.
So that's Marion Lamb and Dinah Easter.
Yeah, and they both stayed on. Some of the others on the first courses stayed on for a bit too, like Caroline Rendell, who's now in charge of the Appleford place, and Rosemary Smith at Winchester.
So that's very, there were, well, the staff and the students were very few in those days.
Yes.
And compared to now, which...
Yes, yeah. Well, we had 4 students on each course.
And now it's up to...
Or at least we tried to have 4 students on each course, but didn't always succeed, yeah. So now we've got more people. We've also got more staff, of course. It took time because we had to train everybody ourselves. There wasn't any other way of doing it.
And many of the graduates, have they stayed on?
Yes, for a while, and then been offered very nice jobs. And well, I mean, we can't keep everybody. I like that, but you can't. And of course, in between that, the apprenticeship scheme was going on too. No, something else that I wanted to say.
Well,
Never mind. Come.
okay. This is another one of these big general questions, but do you feel ideal training is obtained at postgraduate training centers? And how do you feel about internships in, let's say, a student going to a trained conservator and learning through practical work?
And having this theory separate.
It would have, in most cases, that would be individual.
Yes, I'm not very sure about anything, because we've had very good people from all sorts of programs. One of the things about it is that I feel that our program has become too regimented, which means not enough time to develop individual aspects, if you like. In the beginning, you see, people had quite a lot more freedom to follow their own interest and develop them in the way that they wanted. And I really think that we have to try to get the teaching back to that, because otherwise, you see, if you haven't got time to develop the interest that the things that interest you particularly, I think you get bored. Does that mean that you're interested in what I said?
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Well, to go back on what we were just saying, I think that when it comes to postgraduate courses, it's absolutely essential to have as little regimentation as possible. I think it's impossible to put in all of the theory that you want in conservation in less than a year. And I think that we have to, that probably the first year will have to be somewhat regimented in order to lay a good foundation, so that during the second year, and of course in particular during the third year, people can work independently on the objects, under supervision during the second year, but preferably with very little supervision in the third year, so that they really do. Obviously, anybody who wants help should have that, and that should be available on the instant of wanting it during the second and the third year. But it is the only way, I feel, in which people can get as much as each individual person is capable of out of the course. Mm-hmm. That was how it began, and I think that's how it should be.
Well, then jumping a little further then, to another big question, but what part of the current treatment methods that are used at the Textile Conservation Center would you say could use the most help from scientists or modification?
I think that cleaning is a big aspect. I think that all the forms of preventive conservation is one that we need to look into very carefully, because more and more come to light about materials and their interaction with each other. I think that's a serious matter. And you see, that includes materials in cases as well as what the cases are made of. And there are many aspects in this that needs looking into a lot more. I think we're lucky here at Hampton Court Palace to have nice thick walls that absorb an awful lot of things and keep an even general humidity. And but it all comes into the beginning of things in a way. And then I think that I told you yesterday, or was it the day before, about how I started working with chemicals at the Victoria and Albert Museum, and obviously consolidants and sticky different kinds, adhesives of different kind. And then I continued with that when Movilit was developed in Holland for the purpose of sticking textile. I think that I was given a sample in 1964, and I was absolutely fascinated by what you could do with it. And I think we've still got some of the tests of the early days. Now, one of the things that was probably lucky from the point of view of our setup is that we worked so much for houses where objects were displayed in the open, which meant that we were among the first people to get an information of what actually happened to the stuff that is being stuck, which is not very nice. And it is because of that I am quite convinced that we should do as much as we can to promote stitching techniques and supporting techniques that doesn't involve glue, because I think we have to face the fact that any time you stick anything, it probably is the last time you can do anything,
and
because you can't get it off again.
Yeah. And what were some of the, when you did go to see these items that had been previously stuck, and what did you find that you disliked about them?
Well, there was one tapestry that had been glued. Now, of course, it's never necessary to stick tapestries, but this one had been glued. And and where there were open spaces on the tapestry, so that the glue was exposed to the air, there were big lumps of dust on them. I suppose static electricity.
So is the tackiness of the...
Yeah, it continued tacky, because, I don't think you can really stick textiles with anything that doesn't dry, because if you do, then the flexibility gets reduced. So that wasn't very nice. And then the action between the old and the new also caused distortions that were not very nice to look at. But the worst part of it was having to take that off and discovering that you couldn't. And which was why we had to use acetone to remove the glue that has got into a tapestry. You read about that, have you?
Yes.
Yes. Because the sticky was driven into the tapestry by the action of getting the net off.
So that, yeah.
Yeah. So we had to use acetone. That was very dangerous.
So you were mechanically removing it to begin with, but
yes,
but it wasn't possible.
No. And of course they changed and accelerated aging tests are all very well, but you can't always know the practical things that will happen to a textile. I don't think it's really. There can be times when it is the only thing that you can do, but there aren't really an awful lot of areas in which the traditional techniques are not the best to use with traditional textiles.
Well,
I don't regret having done all the work with adhesives, because if I hadn't, I wouldn't really have a right to say these things.
This is going to change the subject again, I'm sorry. But I was wondering about your first professional conference that you attended, and how you feel about the conferences in general, because you do seem to go to quite a few, and so it seems like it's an important...
Yes. Well, the most important part of any conference is meeting the other members of the conference and discuss things with them over meals and at the marvelous parties that mostly are arranged for any conference, and seeing the objects in the different countries in their museums and how it all works. Papers, of course, are useful, especially if you have preprints, so you don't have to listen to the lectures. That's not fair to say, of course, you know that. But because obviously most people prepare all sorts of other things for their lecture, including slides, and you need that. But it is the contact with other people that's important. And my first conservation conference was in Barcelona in 1961. And ICOM, International Council of Museums meeting, and Louisa Berenger was there. Johan Lodwijkszoon, who was at the meeting last week in Hungary, was there as well. I think it was his first conference too. Professor Forbes from Leiden, Gary Thompson, of course, from the National Gallery, Norman Brumell, and a fantastic man from Yugoslavia, whose name was Vonjak, Mr. Vonjak. I think he was meant to he was there, of course, to give the point of view of the Yugoslavian conservators, and he did that extremely well. There were many people. Oh yes, and Dr. Plendelys, who started the ECROM meeting in the ECROM center, yes, in Rome, and Tony Werner, who's working in Hawaii now, lead of the British Museum. It was very, very nice meeting them all, and it was very nice to think. It is very nice to think about how much all of them have added to getting the centre put on, because they've all been behind it in some way or another. And still come. I mean, many of them still come to see what we're doing, help with lectures and things. And this, the conference, everybody were together. There weren't so many people as now, so we only needed 2 coaches to be taken all over.
And did you know everyone? Was it?
Yes, you got to know practically everyone.
Not like the conferences now where half the people are new faces, or is that?
Well, you do get to know people now too. And when you've seen people a couple of times, it's easy, of course, to make friends with people who have the same interest as you have yourself, and that's built in. Yeah. And I do very, very much enjoy meeting all the new people who have entered the profession too. In Hungary, it was wonderful meeting so many people who have begun to work and know that what we all started is in good hands. And there were some marvelous trips in Barcelona. I remember one that went to the mountains, to a monastery, I think. There was an exhibition of photographs of stonework. Yes, stonework. And the coach went along those mountain ways, and when you looked out of the window you couldn't see any road. Yeah, that was a bit scary. I was sitting with Professor Forbes during that. He kept my mind off it by telling funny stories about wartime in London and things.
Well, I think
it's time
maybe
to go.
We should. Yeah. Well, this is our last session, and the center has. I'm going to change the subject from last week's adventure on the roads to the center's moderate position on use of adhesives, and I was wondering how you felt, because in conferences the center does put across this moderate view that they will use adhesives if necessary. The last last-ditch effort.
Yeah.
But stitching is encouraged.
Yeah. Well, of course, it's all, I suppose you could say that all the work at the centre is based on the experience that I have accumulated over the years. And since I was one of the first people to use adhesives, I was also one of the first to discover some of the drawbacks. Most especially because, of course, the work that I did after I left the Victoria and Albert Museum was for the National Trust and historic houses in general, things that were displayed in open condition. And that meant that all of the drawbacks, or, well, perhaps that's strong, that most of the drawbacks became obvious within a fairly short time, anything between 10 and 15 years. It involves such things as the static quality of most plastic adhesives, which attracts dust and dirt in general. Some of it gets really embedded.
As in your article about Mary's christening dress.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
yes. That's
a good example of
yes,
what can happen.
Yes, the from the Jeffrey Museum, was it Mary? Birch, yes, that's right.
Mary
Yes.
Birch, that's
Yes,
right.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. That was a really shocking thing to us all, and I mean that showed an instance where it was truly irreversible. The same with the tapestry that we did. I told you about that.
Yes, I've forgotten which publication it was in, though.
Yeah, it's in the Italian publication. And we were able to undo the damage on that. But it could have been a very, very improper thing. I explained that very badly. The fact is that in order to undo that, because tapestry is a large thing, even if it's if this was a small tapestry, we had to use enormous quantities of solvents. In this case, acetone, and we did it outside, well away from the palace. We had the security officer standing by and the firemen, and ambulances and fire services had been alerted. It could have been very, very bad. We were very lucky. We managed to get through it without incident, but we had to promise never to undertake such a job again.
From the palace security point of view.
Yes. And I think that from the point of view of security too, of health risks to the people who work on something like that, you also have to think, because it's obviously impossible to talk about reversibility when you come to deal with objects that size, and knowing that to reverse it you have to immerse it in solvents. It would to immerse that tapestry in any kind of solvent. We worked out that it would take 50 gallons to cover it with 1 inch, and that just shows. And but really, of course, it is totally unnecessary ever to think of using using adhesives when you're dealing with wool, because wool is very, very rarely in a condition where it would flake away by touching it. It's a totally different thing when it comes to military collars that may sometimes consist mainly of dust, and you can't lift it, you can't do anything. I think that sometimes it would be just fine to stick. We have found a way in which we're able to keep even particles of dust between layers of crepelline, and it still looks good as a flank. But I think that as long as one is totally aware of the fact that using adhesives really is the end of the road for an object, it will only last for as long as it looks good with that adhesive. And nearly always the adhesive begins to flake off after a certain time. It usually cross-links whatever the test beforehand. It attracts dust and dirt, as I said. It won't look good for very long, and then there's nothing you can do about it. So I wouldn't ever use it on anything that can be stitched.
There's one thing that I must say is you're very open and honest about the problems and mistakes in the past, and Mary Birch was just one of those examples. Is that something that you feel is important to?
Well, I think that if we want to think of ourselves as belonging to an emerging profession, we have to have the honesty and the integrity to admit when we go wrong. And I also think that if you get stuck in a groove that you can't leave, obviously you can only be waiting for your pension, and that's the end of that. I hope I'll never come to that. I think that one must keep up both with the times and with the object.
I've been thinking about stories that you've told, and this goes to the stitching side of it. And I've heard something about someone who used their own hair for stitching.
Louisa Bellinger did that. But that's excuse me just one second, because
okay, well, just a small business matter, and we're off again.
It's about Louisa Bellinger.
It was Louisa.
Yes, because it has really always been quite difficult to find the materials for us, and in the beginning it was particularly difficult because more and more fine material and needles and stuff were going off the market.
And this is about when, did you say?
In the early 60s, yes, in very early 60s, 50s, 60s. And so she discovered that she could use her long hair, which was just changing from brown to grey to white, so she was always able to find the right colour.
That's wonderful.
Yes, she prided herself on that.
And how did it work?
I expected it would work very well, because after all, hair has been used for many things like that, including hair embroideries, I'm sure you know. I don't know whether human hair attracts as many creepy crawlies as it seems that goat's hair does. But I expected it would still be quite all right.
Can you think of any other sort of stories of people or yourself or that might be of interest?
Well, do you know about when we did the United Nations curtains?
No.
They had been woven in Sweden as the gift by the Swedish government to the United Nations.
I think I've seen them in New York.
You may have. Well, they began to fall to pieces, we were told, about a year after they were put up. Wool and linen combined. Shouldn't have happened. 10 years after they had been finished, they were taken back to Sweden. I think that everybody thought that in some way the manufacture came into it. We had a Swedish student working with us then, and she suggested that I should be asked to go to Sweden and think of what could be wrong. And I did. This was in the workrooms of Metamors Fjätterström, and they were run by Barbara Nilsson.
That's a very famous workshop.
Yes. And it was quite clear to me, knowing about this the workshop the way that I did, that there could never be any question of them having caused damage of that order. So it had to be something else. Anyway, I arrived in Sweden to stay in a most marvelous house called Norrhem. on the coast, near the coast, near the...
On the west coast.
Yeah, yes, near the workroom, with Eva Louise and her mother, and who now lives in England, both of them.
Eva Louise
Svensson, she's now Eva Louise Pepperal, and she was the one who who put together the courses that Stephen Cousins and Caroline Clark were trained at in tapestry weaving at Westdean College. Yeah, I'll tell you about that afterwards. But anyway, to come back to this thing in Sweden, so I went to this beautiful, beautiful house, and they'd spread the tapestry out for me to look at, and it's very big, two curtains, 7 meters by 15 meters each.
And these were done in tapestry technique?
Yes.
How unusual.
Yes. They were quite beautiful. Even in the sad state they were in, they were still very
How
beautiful.
were they?
They were just simply falling apart everywhere.
So it wasn't
not
just
one
the
colour, but no,
It was
yes.
the weft also.
Yes. In particular the wall. And in order to touch it at all, I had to get close to it, of course. And it was so big I had to crawl on it to get onto it. And it didn't take more than a few minutes before big red bumps came up on my arms. And I'm not very susceptible to that kind of thing, so that was a bit strange. So I thought it has to be something. It has to be a chemical reaction or something. And I suggested that it was tested by the Swedish Textile Research Department. I think it's a government organization. And at the National Gallery, where Joyce Plesters tested. The pH was below 1. So why? Why would that be? And the answer came practically immediately. All textiles hung in public buildings in New York must be flame-proofed. And works of art appeared not to be exempted. I got mad about this and said, why didn't anybody find out that wool does not need flame-proofing because it can't sustain burning? It's stupid. Those things are not handled by people who know. It's a clerk somewhere, I suppose, who's given the job and calls in a firm who does flame-proofing for theatres or something like that. And then that was what had happened. I put together, in my rage and impotence, I put together an article for Studies and sent it to Gary Thompson, who was then the editor of Studies. And he was on the phone immediately on receipt, said, we can't do that, we'll be sued. I said, I haven't said anything but the truth. And he said, no, it doesn't really matter like this or not. Would you like me to rewrite it? And I said yes, and then he did. And a little piece appeared just so that people's attention could be drawn to the fact that flame-proofing might not be the best treatment for any textile of cultural importance or historic importance. And that was one thing. So this was discovered. The next thing was trying to do something about it. There was some money made available by the Swedish government for this. And Eva Louise and her mother and I put together a sort of operation to save the tapestries, which involved doing the work in this beautiful house in Norhem, and the gardens and everything, and getting people from everywhere to come and work on it. So we began by washing it. It was in June and it was raining, and we had to get water from the well, and it was very, very cold. So, and the only way that we could deal with it was making a large bath on the lawn. And then we had to try to neutralize the acid before anything else at all. We did that by rubbing in an enormous amount of bicarbonate of soda and then swilling that out as fast as you can, really having a lot of water in preparation. And I'm glad to say that we got it to neutral after this first introduction to cleaning. We then washed it, and it was dried, and the people who helped with that came from India, South Africa, Holland, England, and America. We've always had American students, I'm glad to say. And the next thing was getting together and finding a way of doing the repair. We decided there to use resin-coated net, but because we had a frame made for the tapestry in the loft of the farmhouse.
15 meters.
It had been woven in two parts.
Oh.
They had both been woven in two parts, and we were able to take them apart to do this. And the thing was that we could only put this net on in sections, overlapping sections, we thought, and then do, as we went along, in order to have something to secure the tapestry onto. And it took 3 months to do that by a team from absolutely all over the world, and now including a Japanese student. Did I say South Africa?
No.
Yeah, and from South Africa, Japanese, South Africa.
Were they supplied by the United Nations? Or
No, it was students who had worked with me over the years, all of them. No, except for the Indian boy. He was a colleague from art school, a fellow student from art school, from Eva Louise's art school in Stockholm. But otherwise, they had worked with me before, so they all knew what it was about, and were willing to pitch in and do everything. And we got up in the morning at 5 o'clock and worked for 4 hours. Spent the middle of the day on the beach, and then another stint later in the day. And Eva Louise's mother did all the cooking, and it was fantastic. And it was, a really amazing experience.
How long did this take?
It took the whole of the summer. And then, unfortunately, of course, it changed the dimensions of the tapestry.
The washing or the netting or
All of it.
And the fire retardant, probably.
Yes, all of it helped. So I believe that they're now a little bit too short for the windows. We suggested they shouldn't hang them at the windows anymore, but that didn't.
They are still hanging there,
Yes,
are they?
yeah, I believe so.
And what year was this? Do you remember?
Yes, that was in 1968, because that was when we moved into our new house in Ealing to get more room for the work. Yeah, it was. The Indian boy also. At night he would be telling our fortunes, and of course we had great parties. It was wonderful. When it was finished, we had to line it, and this time we really had to have it out flat, each one of them, 7 meters by 15. And the only place that could be done was in the bottom of the swimming pool and in the nearby town, which was empty especially for our purposes. And the townspeople came in and stood around the swimming pool looking down on us.
Why the swimming pool? I don't understand.
The question of getting space large enough.
That was enclosed.
That was enclosed.
I see.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Are there pictures from this?
Yeah, we've got some quite good ones. All girls were in bikinis, of course. There's one that includes Eva Louise and Rinske from Holland, who now lives in Australia, and Naoko from Japan. And another one with Susan and Meg, who had been working with me for an awful long time in Ealing.
So this is Nobuko Kajitani?
No.
Another Nobuko.
Naoko,
excuse me.
Yeah, that's right. And she was a very, they were all very good and marvelous company. It was great fun. And of course all staying there and in sharing the bedrooms and the outhouses. Finished?
No, it's okay.
And Eva-Louise's mother had one of the outhouses specially made into a guest apartment for us too.
Sounds like quite a production.
Oh, it was. It was nice. I think it was worth doing, even though the condition was really such that they won't last very long.
So, do you think that the washing actually removed the fire retardant?
As far as we could tell, because we didn't have quite as many facilities then as we have now. But as far as we could tell, we certainly know that it was neutral after the washing.
Well, I don't have any more questions, but
do you want to know about other exciting projects?
Yes, that would be.
I think I've told you about Tipu, doing all that enormous amount of stuff for the Lord Chamberlain's office.
Well, I don't think it's been recorded.
No.
Not on the tape, anyway. You've given talks, lecture talks on.
Yes, and I shall be again this year, because it's. I think that what is so important about what we did there is also stressing the absolute necessity for cooperation between the historians, the scientists, and the conservator. You should not work at all on historic objects, and this is very much a part of what you do, because they are far too important for that. I think that you know that the chief reason for our enormous interest as conservators in Tipu's kit was because of finding that the quilting material was made from small pieces of Indian shawls, 16th, 17th, 18th century shawls. There are very, very few.
Oh, that's terrible. No, well, it's not. Yeah. It's the way it is, but
yeah, I mean, this is
amazing.
Yes.
Is there some sort of symbolism? Why did they use those?
Well, it could be because among the people who advised us was Russell Robinson, who was then in charge of the armor, of the suits of armor, and related material at the Tower of London. And he told us that quilted coats like that were made as coats of 40 layers or coats of 60 layers. And obviously a 60-layer coat will protect you better than a 40-layer coat. But at the same time, it would also be a bit more
restrictive.
Yes.
In your movement.
Yes, which could be banned. In my report, which you probably read, you will know that we counted the layers. This was he was terribly keen. He said this was the first time he'd had a chance actually of counting layers. You can only do that in conservation. So we counted 23 layers of fine cotton, and then the layers of material of old shawls. See, and they seem to be. Some of them seem to be very clear-cut patches. We got to well over 40, towards 50 before we had to stop because we couldn't get to the inside without cutting stitches. And we thought that perhaps if it was meant to be a coat of 60 layers, either the tailors had deliberately cheated by using patches to represent, or it was a generally accepted way of doing it.
That's fantastic.
Yeah. It was a most fascinating project to work on, and I'm sure that you can see how much it. By telling you about it, you can see how much it has influenced the whole setup of the center. I mean, if those things can happen. Then we have to be absolutely certain that the people who deal with them know that their discoveries are important. We cannot leave it in the hands of the the people who traditionally were involved with repair.
So that sort of brings us to your plan for getting back into, well, not back into, but doing more
of
with
the ancient techniques. Yes.
Yes.
Yes, I really do want to develop the teaching of this. I would like to do more original work on research, same as you've just now been doing on the Egyptian doll. But perhaps it is more important at this stage really to teach more people to look. Even if you can't teach them all expertise in the actual techniques of analysis, providing all the people, more of the people who handle ancient techniques know what they might find, then I think that they would be safer. Because then they would be sent to people like Penelope Walton in York, or
for not only that's combining the science end of it, what she can do in the way of dye identification, and
and
fiber,
and weave analysis, and Hero Taylor is another one, and Gillian Eastwood, who's just gone to live, who's just married a Dutchman. I think her name is Vogelsang now, Gillian Vogelsang. I'm sure that's the wrong pronunciation in Dutch, but
now that I think about it, someone like Elizabeth Crawford, who has been working in the field for
this is what
ages,
she's been doing,
and she's still working and presenting.
Yes,
papers.
I'm very pleased to say yes to this. Yes, her work has been tremendously important.
Oh my, here comes Concord.
Yeah, it's the only one that rattles the windows at Hampton Court Palace. I wish it didn't have to come this way.
Well.
I suppose that's progress too.
Yes.
And
on that note, I guess. I thank you very much, Karen. It's been fun. I've enjoyed this interviewing.
Yes, I've enjoyed it too. And be sure that if anything is done with this, that you record to my great admiration and respect for so many of the people with whom I've been working over the years. First of all, of course, Sheila Landy, who's been very closely involved all the time, and Mechtel Fleury-Lemberg in Switzerland, who take our students from time to time and give them more experience in practical work, and from whom we too have had interns, and of course the people who started it all in Sweden and my colleagues in Denmark. And without all the people who've been working in this field, we wouldn't really have got unless we work together, we won't get any further. In Denmark, Else Østergaard's work on the analysis of fibers and weaves is perhaps one of the most important that has been done.
Well, thank you.